On a bitter winter night, Jacob, a grieving father, stumbles upon a pregnant teen shivering on a park bench, alone and broken. With nothing but his own burdens weighing him down, he makes a choice that will change both their lives forever. Little does he know, this one act of kindness will lead him to a miracle he never saw coming, testing the limits of love, sacrifice, and the unbreakable bond that will form between them. But when fate deals Jacob a cruel blow, it will take more than just a helping hand to save him. This time, it's Lily's turn to give everything she has to save the man who saved her. If you are new here, then please subscribe this channel and show thumbs up by liking the video. Now let's move to this wonderful story. Jacob wrapped his worn coat tighter around himself, trying to shield himself from the biting winter wind. The chill cut through the empty streets like a knife, biting at his skin, making him feel more alone than ever. Each step felt heavier than the last as he walked down the deserted street, his mind drifting to the cold emptiness that had become his life since his wife, Rebecca, passed away. Life had never been easy, but the last 2 years had been the hardest of all. It felt like every day was a battle he was barely winning. As a single father, Jacob had to carry the weight of both his son, Elliot, and the grief of losing his wife. He had tried to keep it together for Elliot, but there were moments when the weight of his responsibilities crushed him. The silence in their small apartment was deafening, filled only by the sound of Elliot's quiet laughter and the faint murmur of the television. He had tried his best to provide for his son, to make sure he felt loved and cared for, but inside, Jacob felt like he was barely keeping his head above water. It was on one of those long, lonely nights that fate intervened. Jacob was walking home, lost in his thoughts, when something made him stop. A figure in the distance caught his eye, sitting on a park bench, barely moving. At first he thought it was just another lonely soul seeking refuge from the cold, someone who had nowhere else to go. But as he got closer, he saw her, a teenage girl, shivering violently, her thin frame barely clothed against the freezing air. Her face was pale, her eyes wide with fear, and her belly, swollen with child, was the only thing that marked her as someone in need of help. She was alone, abandoned by the world, and Jacob couldn't bring himself to look away. In that moment, Jacob felt something stir inside him. It wasn't just sympathy. It was something deeper, something that reached inside him and made him feel like he couldn't just walk by. He could have, easily. So many others had passed her by without a second glance, their eyes trained on the pavement, avoiding the uncomfortable truth that this girl needed help. But Jacob couldn't do that, not when her eyes locked with his, pleading silently for someone to notice her. His heart pounded in his chest and his mind screamed at him to turn around. He had enough problems of his own. His life was already a struggle. How could he take on more? But then, a memory surfaced. It was faint, almost buried deep within him, but it was there. Jacob remembered a time not so long ago when he too had been lost, unsure of where to turn. He had been desperate, looking for a lifeline. He had felt the same fear, the same loneliness that this girl must have been feeling. And in that moment he knew that he couldn't just leave her out there alone in the cold. Without thinking, his feet moved forward. He knelt in front of her, careful not to startle her, his voice soft but firm. "You can't stay out here," he said, his words barely louder than the wind howling around them. The girl didn't respond, her lips trembling, eyes darting around, as if waiting for someone else to intervene. But no one did. The street remained empty, indifferent as it always was. Jacob's heart ached as he watched her, her fear so raw, so real. He didn't know her story, didn't know how she had ended up alone in the cold, but he knew one thing: she needed help. He exhaled slowly, gathering his courage. "Look," he continued, his voice a little stronger now. "I don't know your story, but I know you need help. My place isn't much, but it's warm. There's food. You don't have to say anything, just let me help you." The girl stared at him for what felt like an eternity, her expression unreadable. Jacob's stomach tightened with uncertainty, but he held her gaze, willing her to see that he wasn't a threat. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she nodded, the slightest tilt of her chin, but it was enough. Relief surged through Jacob, mixed with a strange sense of responsibility. He didn't know why he had made that decision, but he knew he couldn't take it back. Carefully, he helped her to her feet. Her body trembled from the cold, and Jacob could feel the exhaustion in her every movement. As they walked together, the sound of their footsteps crunching in the snow was the only noise that broke the stillness of the night. Jacob didn't speak. He didn't need to. He was just focused on getting her to safety, away from the cold, away from the darkness that had surrounded her. When they arrived at his apartment, Jacob opened the door to warmth, the faint scent of coffee and the remnants of Elliot's toys scattered across the floor. The small apartment was nothing special, but to him, it was home. He guided the girl to the couch where she collapsed instantly, her body drained of energy. Jacob watched her for a moment, his mind racing with unspoken questions. Who was she? Where had she come from? What had led her to this moment? But for now, those questions didn't matter. What mattered was that she was here, and Jacob was going to help her. He moved to the kitchen, preparing soup, slicing bread, anything to offer her some comfort. He didn't have the answers, but he could offer her a warm meal and a place to stay. When he returned with the food, he sat across from her, watching as she hesitated before taking the first bite. Each mouthful was slow, deliberate, like she was savoring not just the food but the warmth of the moment, the simple kindness that Jacob had shown her. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she looked up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm Lily." And just like that, the beginning of something neither of them could have predicted had begun. The days that followed Lily's arrival at Jacob's apartment were filled with small, quiet moments. The air was thick with unspoken questions, yet there was a sense of calm, a soft, healing presence that filled the space. Lily, still wary and fragile, kept mostly to herself. She didn't speak much, and when she did, her words were soft, almost like whispers. She was a girl lost in her own world of pain and uncertainty, and Jacob understood that. He didn't push her to talk, to explain what had led her to this point. Instead, he offered her warmth, food, and a safe place to stay. Jacob had always believed in the importance of family, but since Rebecca's death, his family had felt incomplete. He had been living day to day, just trying to get by for Elliot's sake. He didn't have the energy or the heart for anything else. But with Lily in his apartment, everything changed. It wasn't just the warmth she brought into the space. It was the quiet strength she carried with her, the same kind of strength he once had to dig deep to find within himself. He saw in her the same kind of quiet resilience he had known all those years ago when he had lost everything and had to rebuild his life from scratch. Lily was starting to adjust to her new surroundings. Jacob had been patient, allowing her to move at her own pace. She helped with small tasks around the apartment, folding Elliot's clothes, wiping down the counters, washing dishes. It was clear that she wasn't accustomed to the stability Jacob offered, and she moved through the motions of life like someone who had never known safety. But with each passing day, she started to show signs of opening up. She would linger in the kitchen, watching Jacob prepare meals, her eyes absorbing the simple normalcy of it all. She never asked for anything in return, never pushed Jacob for answers or explanations. She simply observed, like she was trying to figure out how to be part of this new world she had found herself in. Jacob noticed the small changes. The way Lily's posture had started to straighten when she moved around the apartment, how she began to smile, albeit faintly, when Elliot would make one of his funny remarks. She started to interact with him more, asking him questions about the food he was preparing or the books he was reading. It was small, but it was progress. She was no longer the girl who had arrived on his doorstep broken and scared. She was becoming someone else, someone who had begun to trust again. Elliot was the most curious about her. As a young child, he was full of energy, always running around the apartment, his laughter echoing through the rooms. He was quick to accept Lily into his world, offering her his toys and asking her to play with him. At first, Lily would hesitate, unsure of how to interact with him, But slowly, as days turned into weeks, she began to respond to him. Elliot was persistent, his joy infectious, and little by little, Lily began to smile more, to laugh, to become a part of their small family. She started to help him with his homework, read him bedtime stories, and tuck him in at night. She didn't have to say much. Her presence alone was enough. She was becoming the mother figure Elliot had lost when Rebecca passed away, and Jacob couldn't help but feel a deep sense of gratitude for the bond that was growing between them. But even as the days passed and trust slowly blossomed between them, Jacob couldn't shake the nagging feeling that there was something Lily wasn't telling him. There was a sadness in her eyes that hadn't disappeared, a shadow that lingered in her gaze when she thought no one was looking. Jacob knew that her past wasn't something she was ready to share, and he wasn't going to push her. He could see that she was still processing her own pain, still working through the trauma of her life before she came to him. All he could do was give her the time and space she needed to heal. One evening, as Jacob sat at the kitchen table sipping his coffee while Elliot played in the living room, he watched Lily from across the room. She was standing by the window, gazing out at the falling snow, lost in thought. Her body language had changed in the weeks since she had arrived. There was a softness to her now, a quiet calm that hadn't been there before. Jacob wasn't sure when it happened, but he had come to realize that Lily wasn't just a stranger anymore. She had become part of his life, part of their family. And somehow, despite all the struggles they had faced, they had found each other. As he watched her, Jacob felt a warmth spread through him, a feeling that hadn't been there in years. He felt like they were all on the cusp of something new, something better. Maybe it was the hope he had started to see in Lily's eyes, or maybe it was the way Elliot had begun to call her mom in his innocent way. Either way, Jacob knew that their lives were forever changed. They had come together out of a shared need for healing, for connection, and for love. And though their future was still uncertain, one thing was clear. They had found something precious in each other. Later that night, as Jacob tucked Elliot into bed, he couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed in such a short time. It felt like just yesterday he had been struggling to get by, overwhelmed by grief and the weight of his responsibilities. But now, his life was different. It was fuller, richer, even in the midst of all the challenges they still faced. And it was all because of the decision he made that winter night to help a stranger in need. Little did he know that one act of kindness would set in motion a chain of events that would bring love, healing, and hope back into his life. And he was ready to embrace whatever came next. Weeks passed, and the small apartment that had once felt so empty now pulsed with life. Jacob and Lily had settled into a new routine. The silence that had once weighed heavy on Jacob's heart was replaced by the sound of laughter. Elliot's giggles, Lily's soft laughter, the hum of the radio in the background. Their home wasn't perfect, but it was theirs, and that was enough. Lily had transformed from the scared, silent girl who had arrived on Jacob's doorstep to a confident, nurturing presence in their lives. She was no longer just a guest. She was part of the family. Jacob often found himself watching her as she moved around the apartment, cooking dinner, folding clothes, playing with Elliot. She was growing into her role, learning what it meant to care for someone else. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. And in turn, Jacob found a new sense of hope. He had thought that his days of happiness had ended with Rebecca's death, but now he saw that life could still surprise him. He had a family again, and together, they were healing. But just as Jacob had begun to believe that everything was finally settling into place, life had other plans. It was one early morning when everything changed. Jacob was woken up by the sharp cry of Lily. His heart raced as he jumped out of bed, his mind immediately going to Elliot. But then he heard Lily's voice from the living room. "Jacob, it's happening. The baby. It's too soon." Panic set in, and Jacob was at her side in an instant. Lily was clutching her belly, her face twisted in pain. She was shaking, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. Jacob's mind raced as he tried to calm her down. He had never been in a situation like this before. He had no idea what to do, but he knew that he had to act quickly. Without hesitation, he grabbed his keys, helping Lily to her feet, and they rushed out of the apartment. The drive to the hospital was a blur. The icy roads were a blur of white, and Jacob's thoughts were consumed by fear. He could feel Lily's trembling body beside him, her pain echoing in his chest. He spoke to her, telling her everything would be okay, even though he didn't know if it would be. The only thing that mattered was getting her to the hospital, and making sure she and the baby were safe. When they arrived at the hospital, nurses rushed to meet them. Jacob's heart pounded in his chest as they took Lily away, leaving him alone in the sterile, white hallways. He felt a deep sense of helplessness. All he could do was wait. The minutes felt like hours as he paced, unable to sit still, his mind racing with worry. All he could think about was Lily, about the baby, about everything that was at risk. Hours later, the door to the waiting room opened and a frazzled doctor stepped inside. Jacob's heart skipped a beat as the doctor looked at him, his expression serious. "She's weak but stable. The baby's in critical condition, but we're doing everything we can." Relief flooded through Jacob's body, though the worry didn't go away. He nodded, not trusting himself to speak. All he could do was wait. In the days that followed, Jacob never left Lily's side. He visited her every day, bringing her comfort in the form of small gestures. He didn't know the right words to say, but he knew that just being there was enough. He would sit beside her bed, hold her hand, and reassure her when the fear threatened to overwhelm her. He saw how strong she was, how she fought through the pain, not just for herself, but for her baby. Jacob admired her strength more than he could ever say. After what felt like an eternity, the day finally came when Lily was allowed to hold her baby. Jacob watched as she carefully cradled the fragile infant in her arms. The baby, tiny and delicate, was a miracle, surviving against all odds. Lily gazed down at her son, tears streaming down her face as she traced his tiny fingers with her own. "His name is Luke," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. Jacob stood by, unable to say anything, but his heart was full. He saw the love in Lily's eyes, a love that was as fierce and as deep as anything he had ever known. The baby, this tiny, fragile life, was proof of how far Lily had come. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. She was a mother, and this was the beginning of a new chapter for them all. Over the next few weeks, Jacob watched as Lily's bond with Luke grew stronger. She cared for him with the same devotion and tenderness that she had shown Elliot. Jacob couldn't help but marvel at how much she had changed. She had come so far from the scared, broken girl who had arrived at his door. Now she was a mother, a strong, loving woman who had found her place in the world. And Jacob, who had once felt so alone, now had a family again. They were all healing together, each in their own way. But just as they were settling into their new life, Jacob's world was rocked again. It started with a routine doctor's visit, a checkup that he had been putting off for weeks. He had always been healthy, always taken care of himself. But when the doctor looked at him with a grave expression, Jacob knew something was wrong. "Jacob, your heart is failing," the doctor said. "We need to start treatment immediately." The words hit Jacob like a punch to the gut. His heart was failing, and there was no way to fix it without a transplant. His world came crashing down as he thought of Lily and Luke, Elliot, and the life they had built together. The fear of leaving them behind was unbearable. But just as Jacob had helped Lily when she had been lost, she now refused to let him go. Lily, the girl who had once been alone in the cold, now stood by him with the same strength she had shown when she held Luke for the first time. "I'm not letting you go," she told him. "I'm going to save you, Jacob, just like you saved me." In that moment, Jacob realized that family wasn't just about blood. It was about love, sacrifice, and the bonds that held them together. And with Lily's selfless act, Jacob knew that the miracle he had found in her was the greatest gift of all. Time passed in a blur after Jacob's diagnosis. Each day felt like a countdown, the weight of his failing heart pressing heavily on his chest. He had never expected his own body to betray him. He had always been strong, reliable, someone who could handle anything life threw at him. But now, he was faced with a reality he couldn't escape. He needed a heart transplant, or his time with his family would be cut short. Jacob didn't tell Lily everything. He couldn't bear to see the worry in her eyes, to admit that he might not be there for her and Luke in the future. He had already lost so much, his wife, the life he thought he'd have, and now, it felt like he was on the verge of losing everything again. But as the days turned into weeks, the uncertainty of his condition loomed over him, a shadow that wouldn't lift. Yet, in the midst of all the fear and uncertainty, Jacob found a strange sense of peace in the love that surrounded him. His home was filled with the sounds of laughter, of Luke's baby coos and Elliot's innocent jokes. Lily, who had once been the scared girl he had found on that cold park bench, had become the steady force that held them all together. Her strength was unshakable. She was no longer the fragile, lost girl. She was a mother, a partner, and Jacob couldn't imagine life without her by his side. One night, as Jacob lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling, he heard soft footsteps approach. The door creaked open, and he saw Lily standing there, her face tired but determined. She had been taking care of him, of Luke, of everything, for so long, and Jacob could see how exhausted she was. Yet there was something in her eyes, something that told him she wasn't giving up no matter what. "Jacob," Lily said softly, her voice thick with emotion. "I've been thinking. You saved me when I had nothing. Now it's my turn to save you." He turned to look at her, his heart heavy. "Lily, don't talk like that," he said, his voice low. "There's nothing you can do." "I can give you my heart," she replied, her voice firm, steady. "I'm a match. I've already talked to the doctors. They can do the transplant." Jacob's heart skipped a beat. He stared at her, disbelief filling his mind. "You can't be serious," he said, shaking his head. "Lily, I couldn't ask you to do that." But Lily wasn't asking. She was offering. She had made up her mind. She wasn't going to lose him. She wouldn't let him slip away, not when she had been given a second chance at life, not when she had found something worth fighting for. "You gave me a second chance when I had nothing," Lily whispered, her eyes filled with tears. "Now it's my turn. I'm not going anywhere, Jacob. I love you." Tears welled up in Jacob's eyes as he looked at her. She had given him so much already, her trust, her love, her heart. And now she was offering him the most selfless gift of all. He felt a wave of emotion overwhelm him. How could he ever repay her for this? How could he live with the knowledge that she was willing to risk everything to save him? The surgery was scheduled, and the days leading up to it felt like an eternity. Jacob tried to prepare himself, to accept the fact that his life would be forever changed. He tried to think of the future, of what it would mean to have a new heart, of what it would mean to be able to watch Elliot and Luke grow up. But all he could think about was Lily, her strength, her courage, and the incredible love she had shown him. The day of the surgery arrived, and Jacob was filled with a mixture of fear and hope. He was wheeled into the operating room, the sterile, cold environment contrasting sharply with the warmth of the love he had found. As the anesthesia began to take effect, Jacob's thoughts drifted to his family, his son, his daughter, Lily. They had become his everything, the reason he fought to stay alive. When he woke up groggy and disoriented, the first thing he saw was Lily. She was sitting beside his bed, her face pale but filled with relief. Tears glistened in her eyes as she smiled at him, and Jacob realized that he had never seen a more beautiful sight. She was here. She was alive. And she had saved him. "You're going to be okay," Lily whispered, squeezing his hand. "We're going to be okay." Jacob nodded, his throat tight with emotion. He couldn't find the words to express what he felt. How could he ever thank her for what she had done, for giving him a second chance at life? Over the next few days, Jacob's recovery was slow but steady. He was in pain, but the thought of his family, Lily, Elliot, and Luke, kept him going. He knew that he had to get better, that he had to live for them, and slowly he did. With Lily by his side and with the strength of his new heart, Jacob began to heal. As the weeks passed, Jacob's life returned to a new normal. He was able to be the father he had always wanted to be there for Elliot and Luke, to see them grow and thrive. He and Lily became closer than ever, their bond stronger than anything he could have imagined. She had saved him, but in doing so, she had also given him a new purpose. Together, they had created a family, one built not just on love, but on sacrifice, resilience, and hope. Jacob had once believed that he was too broken to be whole again. But Lily had shown him that even in the darkest of times, miracles could happen. And as he looked at his family, he knew that his second chance at life was the greatest miracle of all.